When you stand before a piece made entirely of interlocking abstract wooden shapes, something subtle but undeniable happens inside your head. It's as if the simplest form of nature, wood cut and shaped by a patient hand, has learned a new language made of angles and negative space, and that language quietly fills a blank wall with meaning that words alone can't quite capture. One moment you see a puzzle locked so tightly together that it feels impossible to separate. The next, you notice soft shadows dancing between the overlaps, suggesting that maybe this whole intricate cluster could come apart with the gentlest touch, like a whisper unraveling in the breeze. People think of wood as heavy, grounded, almost stubborn in its solidity. But when an artist decides to break it down into slices, wedges, arcs, and blocks, then fit those pieces into one another like a puzzle only they can solve, that same wood begins to seem weightless. It floats in your vision, shape supporting shape, grain running in conflicting directions that somehow resolve into harmony. You find yourself leaning closer, tracing the joints with your eyes, wondering if the pieces were cut freehand or guided by machine, if the whole thing is glued forever or if some clever trick of friction alone is keeping gravity at bay. To build such a piece is no small feat. It begins with scraps, humble offcuts from bigger projects, leftover lengths of oak, birch, walnut, or even pine. Some artists favor reclaimed wood, hunting down weathered barn boards with nails still buried inside, sanding away decades of grime until the true color reappears under the blade. Others buy clean, new planks and introduce their own scars and burns with chisels, rasps, and heat, crafting a texture that feels like it's already lived a life before joining the final puzzle. Designing the layout is where vision and patience collide. Some builders sketch countless arrangements on paper first, testing how blocks might rest together, predicting how shadows will fall when a lamp hits from above or when dusk turns daylight into low, warm glow. Others skip drawings altogether, preferring to spread the cut pieces across the workshop floor, moving them like chess pieces until something clicks in the gut, a balance between solid mass and empty air that just feels right, even if they can't quite explain why. Each wooden shape demands its own attention. A block that is too thick or too slender can disrupt the entire flow. Too many sharp edges side by side and the piece looks harsh. Too many soft curves and it loses its tension. So the craftsperson cuts, sands, steps back, sighs, and cuts again, turning a rough plank into a wedge that slips neatly between two others without leaving an awkward gap. When the fitting is perfect, they might test the joint dry first, pressing wood against wood to hear the quiet click of alignment, then carefully decide whether to lock it down with a drop of glue or let friction do the job. This moment, when the builder steps back and watches the parts hold each other in place without screws or nails, is magic in its simplest form. It proves that structure and movement can share the same space, that what appears fragile is sometimes stronger than we expect, and that complexity can be built one humble cut at a time, as long as the hands guiding the saw know when to stop pushing and when to trust the wood's grain to lead the blade. Mounting interlocking wooden shapes is its own delicate ritual. Some artists mount directly on hidden brackets so the piece hugs the wall but lifts slightly at the edges, letting shadows slip behind and turn blank paint into a shifting canvas of light. Others suspend heavier works a few inches forward on standoff bolts, making the whole structure appear to float midair, casting a lacework of shade that breathes and shifts as the sun drifts by the windows. And for larger room dividers or freestanding sculptures, no wall is needed at all. The stacked, interlocked blocks hold their posture proudly in open space, visible from every side like a wooden city frozen in an abstract skyline. What happens when you live with such a piece is nothing short of quiet companionship. You don't just glance at it once and move on. It draws you back day after day, to notice things you swear were never there before. A tiny knot in one plank that looks like an eye. A seam where two grains meet and twist like strands of hair. A shadow that deepens into a perfect oval just after sunset and then disappears again come dawn. In this way, interlocking wooden shapes don't just decorate a space. They remind you that stillness can pulse with a hidden rhythm if you stand still long enough to see it. And then there is the irresistible urge to touch. Friends, children, curious guests, all want to run a fingertip along the tight seams, to push gently on a corner, half hoping to feel it wiggle or come loose. Most builders welcome this. Unlike delicate glass sculptures, this art invites touch. It is tactile by nature, built from a material that begs to be felt. The dry warmth of sanded maple, the slickness of an oiled walnut, the faint ridges where a saw blade bit deeper than planned but the artist decided to leave the scar visible, an honest record of process. No two pieces are ever quite alike. Some grow wide and sprawling like tangled branches frozen in winter wind. Others stay tight and geometric, a grid of squares and triangles locked together like an ancient mosaic lifted from a ruin. Some play tricks with the grain direction. One plank might pull the eye upward, the next drags it sideways, forcing you to trace a mental path through the maze without ever finding an end point. And if the artist feels playful, they might hide a single contrasting piece of wood right in the middle, a flash of bright cherry in a field of sober oak, a reminder that even order needs a whisper of chaos to stay alive. Collectors sometimes hang these works in places meant for contemplation. Above a reading chair, along a quiet hallway, across from a window where late afternoon light can wash over the plains and create slow, crawling shadows. But others dare to place them in more chaotic spaces. Busy living rooms, open kitchens, bustling office lobbies, places where the calm, patient geometry stands in gentle contrast to the daily noise of human life rushing by. No matter where they live, they hold their ground, refusing to shout yet impossible to ignore. When asked why they choose wood for such abstract experiments instead of metal or stone, makers often shrug and smile. Because wood breathes, they say. Because no two planks are ever the same, even if milled side by side. Because working with wood teaches patience. You learn to read the knots, respect the grain, and accept that sometimes a board will surprise you by splitting along a line you didn't plan. This imperfection isn't a flaw, it's the soul that metal can't mimic and stone can't whisper back. So next time you see a wall or a corner humming with these interlocking shapes, lean closer. Let your eyes slip through the cracks and run along the edges. Listen to the silence between the blocks. Feel how your mind slows down, how your hands want to test the puzzle, how your breath falls into sync with the quiet order someone carved from a living tree and locked together piece by thoughtful piece. And if you ever dream of making your own, remember that all you really need is wood, patience, and the courage to trust that each cut, each angle, each joining will find its rightful place. When people think wood art, they usually picture planks on walls, maybe a live-edge slab if they're feeling fancy. But interlocking abstract wooden shapes laugh at the idea of neat panels and flat grain. This is wood cut loose. Free to twist, nest, slip together and come apart again, if you dare. The magic is in the fit. Each shape is odd on its own. An arc here, a notch there, a chunk scooped out to hug its neighbor like puzzle pieces designed by someone who never liked squares. When you lock them all together, they form a single visual push and pull, a composition you can't read in one glance. The eye follows curves, hits a sharp corner, falls into a gap, jumps back out again. Its movement frozen in grain. It starts with raw stock. Slabs, offcuts, anything solid enough to shape. No plywood here. You want real wood so the grain runs true through each bend and twist. Some builders sketch the entire composition first, tracing overlapping loops and negative spaces until it feels alive. Others just pick up a block and cut by instinct, fitting each fresh piece against the last like stone masons building a dry wall. Cutting is slow. Bandsaw for broad curves. Jigsaw for tighter turns. Carving gouges for recesses that can't be done by blade alone. Sandpaper until the fit feels like a handshake, snug but not forced. You want the pieces to nest together naturally, not jam in like forced puzzle parts that split over time. Thickness matters. Some artists keep it uniform so the whole piece sits flat against the wall when mounted. Others play with depth. One block thick as a brick, another shaved down so it recedes behind the bigger forms. Shadows dance where the layers step in and out of each other. A good light source makes this even better, throwing soft highlights along the edges and into the seams. The interlock can be literal, tongue and groove hidden dowels, or clever cuts that slide together tight with no glue needed. Or purely visual. Pieces arranged so perfectly they look locked but stay put only because they're glued or pinned to a backboard you'll never see. Wood choice is the silent hero here. Some builders stick to one species for subtlety, all ash or all oak so the shape itself does the talking. Others mix bold contrasts, pale maple beside deep walnut, cherry's red glow beside charred blackened poplar. Sometimes they stain or scorch pieces to break up color even more, but the best sets let the grain do most of the work. You don't need paint when nature already did the patterning. Mounting is about invisibility. No ugly screws through the front. Usually a French cleat hidden behind the backboard or a hidden frame that lifts the whole piece of breadth off the wall. This tiny shadow gap makes the shapes feel like they float, a wooden constellation stuck mid-orbit. Finished right, an interlocking abstract wall piece doesn't sit quietly in the background. Pulls people in. They trace the edges with a finger trying to see how it all fits. They look for the join lines, sometimes never finding them until light shifts. It's calm and chaotic in the same breath, a contradiction nailed to drywall. Making one is an exercise in patience and surrender. You plan just enough to keep the parts from clashing but not so much you choke the spontaneity. If you try to force symmetry it goes dead. The beauty is in imbalance that somehow resolves itself when all the parts find their place. And once it's done, once every curve and angle clicks together, you see it for what it really is. A reminder that even solid wood can flow. That hard grain can look soft if you give it a path. That wall art doesn't have to be a flat canvas or a plain panel. It can be a puzzle of shapes, locked forever in a dance too complex to fake. So next time you see a rough block, don't see a shelf or a board. See the curves hidden inside, waiting to wrap around another shape that doesn't exist yet. That's where interlocking abstract wood art begins. In the space between pieces, the quiet promise that wood can be more than flat. It can fit, twist, connect, and hold its secrets tight for anyone patient enough to trace every edge.